Hi, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining in again, guys. And this is CommerceShop's podcast. Here we talk about technology trends, AI around e-commerce and retail. And we are joined by Ricardo Belmar. He's a globally respected retail thought leader and a podcast host, producer, and he was a former retail go-to-market executive at Microsoft. He is the founder of Retail Razor Podcast Network, and he has been associated with a lot of Retail Alliance. And he is here to share about his experience and insights around retail and the new trends. Welcome, Ricardo.
Thanks, Satish. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Ricardo, I saw that you have been spent a lot of time in retail, technology, and media. You have also spent time with Microsoft.
Mhm.
So, how is the journey like? What do you see that is so different from the day you started today? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So it's been an interesting journey in that I've been working with retailers for close to 25 years now,
Yeah.
always on the technology side of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say the number one thing that's changed really is um, more of an approach where retailers embrace technology now versus originally when I first started, technology was I would say a little more of a secondary thought in that it was things that you needed to have in some parts of the business, but it wasn't anything that was viewed as driving business or being critical infrastructure to either interface with customers or run your operations. And so there was always a little bit of, I think, hesitation in adopting new technologies
Mm-hmm.
from retailers. And also, I used to see a lot of hesitation in talking about the technology they were using because since there wasn't as much technology being used by retailers, most saw it as a competitive differentiator.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of retailers had a sense that if I talk about it too much, then my competitors will know what I'm doing and they'll start to do it and gain the same advantage. And so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of those things, I think, made it difficult to engage a lot of the times in moving some of these things forward with retailers. But I think now there's a lot more openness to it. Everyone
Okay.
understands that they need technology, right? They need the technology, and it actually helps drive the business forward.
Interesting. And I see that you host a lot of podcasts yourself and you talk with a lot of retailers. So, what's one thing that retailers today should not ignore, or something that this is something is going to change your industry for a lot by a lot? What's something
Mhm.
that you can talk about?
Yeah, sure. So, and frankly, in all the podcasts we're doing in the Retail Razor podcast network now, there's really two areas that we focus on quite a bit.
Okay.
One is just AI in retail broadly, which is
Mm-hmm.
at this point is probably an obvious one to say, as it's true
Mm-hmm.
for just about any industry, but especially in retail. I think retail is one of the industries that has the most to gain and benefit from all the different flavors of AI technology. And then the other one is around retail media, or often
Mm-hmm.
called commerce media networks as well. I think that's another margin driver and profit driver for certainly for larger retailers,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely one that's important. And the two are starting to intersect now more
Mm-hmm.
and more. And that's really been an interesting space where, depending on the point of view that you take, it's either a bit of a crisis moment that AI may, uh, in some viewpoints,
Mm-hmm.
deflect the significance of a retail media network, and in some viewpoints, it might augment it and help drive it. So it's really interesting to see how that is playing out. And I think, if
Mm-hmm.
anything, for any retailer out there, right? Those are two things that you have to be participating in some way and taking advantage of to
Mm-hmm.
really drive the business forward.
Understand. And when you talked about retail media, like I see that big companies are doing it, big
Mhm.
retailers are investing on that or having that idea. So if there is a small retailer who has not heard about it or not aware of it, can you give an idea like what this opportunity means for them?
Yeah,
How can they explore it?
yeah, sure. So originally, really, where did retail media came from? We kind of have to go back a few years to when Amazon started adding
Mm-hmm.
paid promotional spots on all their product search pages.
Mm-hmm.
So as a consumer, right, if you were on Amazon at the time, you do a search, and suddenly you see all these sponsored ad placements at the top of the page for products
Mm-hmm.
that were relevant to the search you were doing. And over time, I think most people, if you go to Amazon, you're starting to see more and more and more of these sponsored ad placements, to where you do a search, probably the first half of the page is all ads for that product, or that product category. So that's really where this started. It was all on e-commerce websites, particularly on marketplaces, where the products on offer were coming from multiple sources, multiple providers. It wasn't a vertically integrated retailer who only sold their own products. And Amazon started generating a significant amount of revenue from this advertising. And if you were a seller on their marketplace, it became almost a necessity that you had to advertise your product in order to really win that click from a consumer. Because if you didn't, someone else did who offered the same product, and they would get the customer transaction, and you wouldn't. So that's really where this originated. And then we had other large retailers like Walmart. Obviously, Walmart has a significant marketplace presence, and they started doing the same thing with their Walmart Connect offering. Then you had Target doing the same thing. And then one by one, you saw all of the big box retailers, Best Buy, all the grocery chains, Kroger, Albertsons. They all operate in some fashion an equivalent retail media network. And as it grew over time, it expanded beyond the e-commerce website. And particularly, I would say, this started with grocers. In groceries, you always had ad placements in the store, whether it was an end cap display, and there were promotional shopper marketing dollars behind that. There was dollars coming from those brands that got that placement on the end cap that were being paid to the retailer to do those. And the grocers realized, we can connect these things together and have our online media placement ads coordinated with these in-store advertising placements. And now we can present a combined offering to the brands to really run a campaign to promote their product and target our customers. And as this evolved, retailers really refined how they position this. And it wasn't so much just buying an ad placement for a product, for a campaign. It was really about all of the customer data that retailers realized they had, that brands want access to. Because what is a brand who's selling a product and doesn't have a store? They need to figure out where that customer is, and they need to get a product placement in front of that customer to both raise awareness and to get them and entice them to buy that product. Well, retailers, it turns out, right, they realize they have a great source of first-party data that tells them exactly, they know exactly what you're buying because you bought it from them. So they were able to tie this data and this knowledge they had about customers into these ad units, whether it was online or in-store, and offer it to brands in a way that they could do really highly targeted advertising to the right customer profile the brand wanted. And, at the time when this started, what were the alternatives? You had brands have very traditional media placements as alternatives. It was TV. They were just starting to get into streaming TV advertising. You had the open web and banner ads, which get very low conversion rates. And you don't really have good targeting capability for that. You're kind of defining a very broad definition or profile and hoping that, that ad gets put in front of someone that might actually care about this product. So that's where all of this began. And as from the retailer's perspective, obviously certain large retailers started doing this first. They had a better source of data. They had more resources to create these offerings. And then as you kind of go down in size for retailers, you start to see in smaller ones. So originally, a lot of the regional grocery chains started producing really enticing networks because they have good quality data about their customers and what customers buy. Where you kind of don't see this happen as much, it's a little less frequent in specialty retailers, particularly specialty apparel, because they tend to be vertically integrated. So you go to a apparel retailer at the mall, right in the mall store, they only sell their own products. So there really isn't anybody else who's going to benefit from advertising there other than themselves. So it doesn't quite make sense.
So,
but for everyone else, it did. And then as this has expanded, now we're starting to see some of these networks realize, I don't just, as the retailer, need to offer, because I have this customer data, I can go beyond the people who are selling products in my store. I can go to these non-endemic providers. Maybe there's a car manufacturer that wants to advertise to this audience, and I can put those ads in front of my customers, either online or in store on a screen somewhere. And that's now started trickling into the offering as well. Then we're also seeing where, who else has great data around their audience? Well, connected TV and streaming services that we all watch at home, right? They have great data about us because they know exactly what we're watching from their app. So that's really useful information for an advertiser. for that. So we've seen these media networks partner with the connected TV providers, with the streaming providers, and by combining those data sets, now they can offer a much more refined set of targeting tools to the advertiser, to a brand, and say, you can now get ad placements, and we'll follow that customer from what they're watching on TV to when they're in the store to when they're online. There are other interesting ones. Best Buy partnered with CNET online, so that now they can combine data from, if you're a consumer visiting CNET to research electronics products, well, now Best Buy has a relationship with them that they can connect their customer data to that viewing data that CNET has and offer that to a brand to target advertising in a much more refined way, which starts to look more and more appealing to brands. So it's definitely spreading everywhere. So for smaller brands, it's more a matter of who can you partner with the data set that you have that makes it look more enticing to a brand who wants to reach that audience.
Interesting. So, like, what if there is someone who is doing 5 million in revenue in retail or
Mhm.
e-commerce? If he is trying to adapt to this retail media, like, does that going to be uh, generating additional revenue, or will he be losing the customer? Because there is always a chance, in case if he puts a media that drives the traffic outside
Mhm.
his website,
Mhm.
will he lose a conversion? Because many of our customers also have thought about this. They
Mhm.
always have these kind of questions.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
So I think where the only part where I see there could be a risk is if you're going to bring in non-endemic advertisers, so
Hmm.
advertisers for products that you don't offer,
Hmm.
then certainly in that scenario you're trying to get someone in your audience to click on that ad online to go to another website.
Yeah.
So you are directing people away, right? So
Hmm.
that should impact how you're pricing that offering, because you are risking the fact that you may lose a potential sale on a
Hmm.
product you're selling for the benefit of those ad dollars. Now, a lot of this is you have to kind of get into the mindset of, well, that consumer that clicked on it, why were they on your site to begin with? They were really shopping for something they wanted to buy. You kind of have an expectation they're going to come back because they never finished the shopping mission that they were on if they click through that. So the ad is still a little bit of a distraction, even in that
Hmm.
sense. So in all likelihood, where the way most of these would be implemented, you'd expect that's going to open a new tab in their browser. So you're not going to lose the
Hmm.
original website. They're going to temporarily get distracted for that customer to go to this alternate website. Are they likely to immediately buy something from that? I think the brands that are most likely to buy these ad units, they're doing this more for awareness because they're trying to just maintain connection to that consumer, knowing that down the road they're going to make a purchase in that category, but it's probably not right now that they're going to
Okay.
do that. So it's a little bit of just staying top of mind with them. So if they click through, they're going to go to a landing page, they'll see some information. The likelihood that they buy that product, I generally think that most consumers don't act that way. But it
Hmm.
does now register in their head that, oh, I've seen this product, I know about it. Next time I'm shopping for something in that category, I'm going to remember that that particular product exists. But I was on this mission to buy this other product. So I'm going to go back to that website. So you
Okay.
kind of have that expectation, and it impacts how you price that. So you might, for example, as a retailer, be pricing that ad unit. Um, you might say that because of that risk, I'm going to price it a little higher than I have for other advertisers who
Okay.
are promoting something I sell on my website, right? Because I'm expecting a conversion from that one into a sale or a transaction, so I can price that a little lower. So it really just depends on, and a retailer has to kind of evaluate a little bit what are their customers like. I mean, if they have a high bounce rate, for example, in their website normally, then they might expect that this is going to increase that because you're directing them to go elsewhere.
Hmm.
If you don't, and normally your customers come to your site and they stay there and you have a really good conversion rate, then the risk is lower. So it's a little bit less of a concern.
Yeah, understand. Which industry you think has done this more uh, effectively? Like, if you talk about, is it more in automotive
Mm.
or fashion? They have done this, and they are seeing a significant increase in their overall revenue, and they don't lose conversions. Is there any specific industries they should think about this, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen particularly good examples, but if I look at where the investments are going in offering these things, I think the grocery retailers are the ones that benefit the most um, from that because of what how do the customers shop on them, right? So
Mhm.
um, if you look at it from the standpoint that e-commerce is not yet as significant a percentage of sales for grocery as it is in other retail segments, if
Mm-hmm.
that's where the ad units are and they're promoting things, it's probably a little less risk for the grocer that people click away.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the grocers probably want you to come into the store to make that sale anyway, because it costs them less
Mm-hmm.
for overall transaction than if you do it via e-commerce. Because most grocers still have a lot of high labor cost involved in picking and packing that sale if you do it through e-commerce. But
Mm-hmm.
I think they're the ones that have the widest breadth of ad unit offerings for that. So they probably are the ones that stand to gain the most. I don't know that I've seen a lot of apparel brands taking advantage of that. So I don't think you'll go to a grocery store and expect to see a lot of fashion ads
Yeah.
on the site or in store either. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
People, when they give examples for this, like to always use automotive as an example, because car companies tend to place ads anywhere and everywhere they can,
Okay.
because they know, right, that it's a highly considered purchase, right? Especially where things are now, where the numbers are that people are buying fewer new cars at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's in the interest of the car manufacturer to constantly be in front of a customer with their brand, because they don't know, it could be a year from now that a given customer who's targeted with that ad is finally in the market to buy a car. And so
Mm-hmm.
whoever, the logic behind this is whoever's put the most ads in front of that consumer is probably going to be the most top of mind for that consumer
Mm-hmm.
when they start to think of which car brands do I want to go look at and consider. Because unlike, when you buy groceries, you just decide, yeah, I'm going to buy this version off the shelf. But cars being expensive product that they are, it's a highly considered purchase, right? So people research, they don't just on a spur of a moment decide I'm going to go with this brand. It takes a lot of thought for that. So there's a reason why, as an advertiser, car companies are always advertising and trying, essentially blanketing everywhere they can to get in front of customers, because they need to always stay top of mind at the brand level, because you don't know when that consumer is going to purchase. And I think the numbers are that now the average consumer isn't buying a car more frequently than every 10 years. So if you
Yeah.
think of, in the lifespan of each one of us, how many cars are you likely to buy in a lifetime, compared to going to an apparel store and buying a shirt? Right, you're going to buy hundreds of shirts. You're not going to buy more than 5 or 6 cars in a lifetime.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
Understood. And in terms of the in this retail media space, how fast it is growing? Like, is it growing at 10%, or is it widely adopted? What is the
Mhm.
growth rate you see with this media
So,
space?
so it's interesting. I think I usually follow eMarketer has the best, I think, forecasts around
Mm-hmm.
so retail media area. So they try, I think, a pretty high growth rate. I mean, it has been something on the order of maybe 20-25% year over year. What's
Wow.
interesting is that where is that growth showing up? So as a marketer field, right, it has a high growth rate, but it turns out that 70-75% of that market is all going to Amazon and Walmart,
Oh,
because
okay.
they're the two biggest marketplaces. So it's where all the advertisers and the brands are putting their money, because the likelihood that they sell their product on one or both of those marketplaces is pretty high. And if you're on that marketplace, you have to spend something on the advertising to get your product visible to consumers. So they tend to capture the most spend. And I think that the numbers over
Mhm.
the last year, if I remember the last eMarketer reports, are somewhere on the order of maybe 75% is going to just those two retail media networks. So everyone else, and
Mhm.
this is typically the counterpoint to why you see some analysts in the industry will say that we're hyping this up a little more than it needs to be, because everyone's fighting over that remaining 20-25%.
Yeah.
And there's truth in that. Yes, they are, but you have to remember that it's still growing. So it's not the total pie that everyone's chasing of media spend from
Mhm.
advertisers and retail media is not fixed. It's growing significantly every year. So even if 3/4 of it is being captured by Amazon and Walmart, it's still a sizable dollar amount that's available for everyone else
Okay.
to capture. So that's why it's still interesting and worthwhile for other retailers to pursue this.
To pursue. Interesting. So, like, with retail, and you talk with a lot of people. So, how is AI impacting? That's another big topic you
Mhm.
talked about. So, how is AI is changing it? What's you think, in your opinion, is an hype or something it's going to be
Yeah.
substantially valued?
Yeah, I mean, AI is definitely having a huge impact in retail. You can't go to an industry event or a conference in retail without 95% of all the sessions having people on stage talking about how they've used AI for this or how they're planning to use AI for that. So it's everywhere. So I think retail is probably one of the top industries that every AI supplier or technology supplier using AI is targeting. And I think that's because it's one of the industries that stands to gain the most because retail, kind of like I hinted at the beginning, right? When you look at technology in retail, there's a lot of legacy technology at retailers that have been around a long time. So there's actually, in a sense, a tech advantage to younger retailers that haven't been around more than a few years. They've been fortunate enough that they've put technology in place in this very modern era. So the likelihood that they already started with something that had AI is pretty high. But if you're a legacy retailer and you've been around for 20 years, you probably still have 20-year-old technology in your operation somewhere that you haven't replaced because that tech debt and the replacement cost for technology at large retailers and legacy retailers is really high. And it takes time. It's very time consuming. And every retailer has to prioritize a project. So they may have 10 different technologies that need to be replaced, but they probably can't tolerate doing more than 2 of those projects a year
Yeah.
because that's just the resource intensity is such that they can't tolerate more than that. And if for most retailers, they don't really have the full calendar year available to do the project because they can't afford the risk of changing technology during the holiday shopping season. So in that fourth quarter of the year, you have very little technology adoption going on at the majority of retailers. So you really only have the first 3 quarters of the year to accomplish that. So it's a limited window, resource intense. It's hard to do. But actually, that's one of the promises that AI is offering, right? Is a little bit easier approach to implement a new technology. It can be done faster. It makes the business more efficient. Where I think a lot of retailers are getting caught up here is that there's a lot of chatter. We see this when we see big brands announcing layoffs that they're using AI to justify replacing people. And I just came back from a conference last week where a majority of the retailers that were on stage were talking about how they thought that's what they were going to do. But what they've learned so far this year is that every time they start an AI project that's intended to replace people, the project fails. And the technology doesn't really deliver what they intended. But if instead they go into the project with the approach that it's not going to replace any people, it's actually going to augment that team's capabilities, and it's going to either make it easier for the existing staff to get tasks done, or it's going to allow them to do things they couldn't do before for lack of time. Those projects tend to be successful, and that's where AI is winning for retailers. Is in this whole concept of I'm going to augment what we already do. And then I think the third approach, which I haven't seen as much of because it's obviously harder, I think the retailers tackling AI the best are asking themselves, let's look at all the business processes we have and figure out, all right, which ones are we doing because that was the only way we could do it? But if we were to start over and redefine that process using AI, could we completely change how we do it in a totally different way versus just asking ourselves, how can AI help us make this process complete faster? So it's kind of a nuanced difference, but I think it's very transformative when retailers say, I want to throw away the process I have for this function because I'm going to use AI to completely redefine how I do it. It takes longer, I think, for a project like that to develop. It's not something you're going to do in 6 weeks in any major business processes. But I think, when we look maybe 6 months from now and we look back at what did retailers do, we'll see more examples of that where they started in the years saying, I'm going to completely change a process that I don't like how we're doing it and see if AI makes us better.
And I know I'm close to Macy's technology office here in Atlanta. So many times they talk about us migrating from the old system to the new system. Is retailers more involved in doing that as what you are saying? Then when will they think about implementing the new trends and technologies?
Yeah, it really depends. And I think it has a lot to do with the mentality of some of the individual leaders at retailers. So they can look at it as we have an old system in place, we need to replace it. What's the new technology that we do for that? Or they can say, let's not constrain ourselves to just what's the right replacement. How do we again, change the process that this technology is supporting. Maybe there's a different way we can accomplish that process and that business function. Maybe
Mhm.
AI is part of that answer, and let's work with a technology partner that understands what this problem is and what the process is, and come up with a completely new way to do it.
Mhm.
That I find is, retailers that approach it that way may take longer to get to that conclusion, to get that implementation done. But when they're done, they see a much better return on the value of that change than had they just done a direct replacement of an older technology with a new one, but didn't change the process.
I understand. Uh, so the next question is more on the with AI being placed, like personalization that's been always in the minds of retailers.
Mhm.
Is do you think AI is delivering it that promise both in the customer experience and retail media? So is that now the time it's
Yeah,
finally
yeah.
delivering
I
it?
think it's definitely helping and putting things on a better path. I think there's been a pretty big disconnect in that with the technologies to date that
Mhm.
retailers were using to personalize. Retailers felt they were accomplishing the personalization, but when you go and ask consumers, consumers have completely opposite view. They don't believe that they're getting anything personalized. They just believe they're getting a higher volume of
Mhm.
contact.
Mhm.
So if you're the retailer, if you're measuring how well you're personalizing based on how many unique emails you send to your customer database promoting something, and your basis is probably, well, I'm only offering them things that based on their purchase history, for example. I think there's a high likelihood of interest in these other products, and you're considering that personalized, and you're checking the box and saying, great, I've accomplished it, it's done. That's not how the consumer sees it. What we're finding is the consumers look at that as just noise. They're
Okay.
saying, I get so many emails from this retailer, I don't even bother reading them anymore.
Okay.
And it's an extra effort to click unsubscribe. So you have consumers, they want to unsubscribe, they just don't read it, they just delete it, because it's
Okay.
just noise to them. And in a way, I think for the consumer, when you're sending them a communication that's personalized to them, it matters more to the consumer, like where are they in that shopping journey in that moment, which the
Mhm.
retailer may or may not have data that tells them where they are. For example, if you're sending personalized emails around seasonal apparel, right? Because we know winter's approaching, so obviously you're going to send things when you have winter apparel in stock. That's what you're going to promote to them. But do you know if that customer really wants to buy new winter clothes this season, or are they just going to
Mhm.
wear what they had last season? You really don't know.
Yeah.
um, and so the consumer, if they're not already planning to look for something, that email is just noise. It's
Yeah.
not helping, it's not giving them a reason to want to shop. It's just noise to them. So they're probably not dealing. And I think this has been the challenge with personalization, is that expectation is different. I think retailers have always thought, if I make the content relevant, then it's going to be effective.
Yeah.
But what that doesn't address is what caused the person to even pay attention to this fabulous content that was personalized in the first place.
The
Um,
situation changes a lot.
yeah, exactly. So I, I think the hope is that with AI in these systems, and you see different technologies are approaching this differently, but I think where AI helps is it's allowing retailers to better use and extract insights from the customer data they have, so they can get a little bit more refined. So I think the hope is there that with AI we'll finally get to where the personalization matters to the consumer, um,
Mhm.
more than it has in the past to the retailer.
And talking on AI, I think AI itself has evolved into agentic AI now.
Hmm.
So, how do you see that? Like, is agentic AI is going to be impacting more with anything on the retail media?
Hmm.
I know in retail, I think there are so many automations planned, but on retail media, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a big question right now. So there's really
Hmm.
two points of view. One is that retail media could potentially suffer from agentic AI because it alters how consumers discover new products, right? So
Yeah.
one of the original promises with retail media is, if I'm the retailer and I have a retail media network, what am I telling the brand? Well, I'm going to help your customers discover your product because I'm going to give you good ad placements. When they're searching for something, your product is going to pop up. But now in an AI model, how is the consumer finding a product? They're having a conversation with the AI and asking questions, investigating, what they like, what they don't like about a product. And the AI is helping them narrow down that search before that consumer has ever gone to a retailer's website.
Hmm.
And so when the AI finally gives them a recommendation, and maybe it gives them a half dozen different product options. They're
Mhm.
probably linked to a website. So what does the consumer do? They click on the one that they think is the most interesting. Well, that link is going to go to a product page. The AI
Mhm.
would have found that product because it found a product page for this product on a retailer's website. So the questions are, well, if 10 different retailers sell that same product, which one does the AI pick? Which one does it show to
Mhm.
the customer? So that's one question now. And all of that happens outside of anything retail media has been doing to promote that
Yeah.
product. So
Yeah.
that's one point of view, is that it's a little bit of a crisis moment for retail media, that it may have a negative impact. I think the alternative viewpoint is that we're making a lot of assumptions in how that consumer is using the information the AI gives it. So
Mhm.
um, I've drawn an analogy, and I've seen others do the same, that if you think about a traditional search approach that a consumer takes, let's say they go to Google and they do some searching based on keywords or whatever it is, and they come up with a list of results on a search page, and they click one of those to go to a retailer's website. Well, in the past, the model was the retailer hopes they get to the website and it's hopefully on a landing page where they can show other things. And so now they've captured that consumer, and they're hopefully going to build a cart with multiple items beyond just the one that they were originally shopping for. And that's where retail media can have an impact, because you have all these ad placements on the page, and it hopefully entices a consumer to build a cart. Um, but in that model, though, what a lot of consumers did is they'd see a lot of results. Rather than clicking the link and going through, they just say, oh, I see this product, and oh, that's this retailer. Let me just open a new tab and type in that retailer's name, and I'm just going to go to their website directly. They didn't actually
Okay.
click through from the search. They went through. So that's not been tracked before, right? So that there's nothing that can measure the fact that consumer did this, because the retailer doesn't see them until they get to their website, and it doesn't look like there was a referrer there. The consumer just went to the website. So there's always been sort of this dark search kind of capability, or dark conversion, where a consumer gets to a retailer, but you've lost that trackability to it. So you have to ask the question, then fine, if the consumer has now replaced the Google search with an AI conversation with an LLM, then are they truly always clicking through the link at the end, or are they just using that as the new guide that says, oh, okay, it's showing me these 5 products or at these 5 different retailers. Let me go to the second retailer's website and see what they have. A lot
Okay.
of if that's how people used to shop, I would argue that they're going to continue shopping that way. The fact that they had a conversation with the AI doesn't change that mentality. It just changed the approach they followed to get the narrowing down to, from an infinite number of products down to a half dozen. That's what changed, not the mechanism that consumer used in their head to decide which retailer's website to go to.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the
But
distinction lies. And then
that
there's
would be.
maybe a third piece, is that, we briefly saw when ChatGPT had the instant checkout, where you could just
Yeah,
buy
that's
something
my next
directly, right?
question
And
on
then
the
they took it
agentic
away.
checkout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of arguments in the industry around, well, how realistic is this? So the fact that they took it away doesn't mean it's never coming back. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we're never going to see an instant checkout. And Google is doing a lot of work right now with their UCP protocol and promoting this in their AI mode to just buy directly from within the AI conversation. So I would argue that this is opening up a new sales channel for retailers.
Hmm.
Um, the real question is, depending on what school of thought everyone is in, some people think this is going to totally change the model and everybody's going to buy that way because it
Hmm.
removes all the friction and makes it super
That's not the
easy.
case. Yeah.
I tend to disagree with that much enthusiasm for it. I think it's going to be a new channel, and yeah, we're going to see a percentage of
Mhm.
transactions going to go to it. But everyone said the same thing when e-commerce first came around,
Yeah.
that it was going to totally change everything. Stores are going to die. Everything's going to be bought online. And here we are, 25 years later, and best case scenario is e-commerce is getting maybe 15 to 20% of those sales, and the
Yeah.
rest is still happening in stores. So if we now shifted to an agentic commerce model with an instant checkout, and even if the way Google is architecting it now, where I can build a universal cart across retailers, there's still certain product categories I don't think people will ever buy that way, because you
That's
just
true.
need to be able to see it. You need to actually touch it, feel it in the store. Yeah, there's a lot of products that you don't care, right? If you see it, you've got a good price, you're happy, you'll buy it, you'll click it. Obviously that works, or we wouldn't have big
Hmm.
marketplaces like Amazon and Walmart that are so successful. Um, but that
Hmm.
means it's the percentage of sales. It's not, it's not going to be 90%. It's not going to be 70%. I don't know what the number is, but it's, if it took 25 years for e-commerce to get to 20%, maybe agentic commerce takes 10% and it takes 10 years to get there. I don't know. I think we'll have to wait and see how consumers take it. I think that because we're all in the middle of it, because we're in the industry and we're in the technology, we get
Mhm.
really excited about it. But if you think of the average consumer that's sitting, somewhere in a rural or suburban area outside of a dense urban population, do they even pay? Are they even paying attention to all this technology at the moment? What are they using Chat GPT for? They're asking it questions about their everyday life. They're not really worried about shopping. So
Yeah,
we'll have to see how that turns out.
right. I see that. I was the other issue that generally the advertisers, the industry faces the attribution problem.
Mm.
How do you think retail media handles that? Is there a way you see that is being tracked properly, or?
So I think there's definitely opportunity for better
Mhm.
attribution in that sense. Certainly, because especially if we look at retail media ad units that are online, right? Everything is trackable, right? So the fact that you click through that
Mhm.
ad, we know that the system knows that you clicked it. It knows whether that led to you actually completing the transaction or not, or whether you abandoned the cart. And if it takes you 3 weeks to make a decision over that 3 week period, it is possible for these systems to have tracked how many different ads were shown to you about that product, how many of them did you click on, to help paint a picture of how are you influenced. But um, and then at the same time, now the surface is expanded, right? So now if that same consumer might see ads for the same product while they're watching TV on Netflix or on Amazon or on whichever streaming service they're on, and all of that can be interconnected on the back end, via retail media technologies, to know that, yeah, that consumer, there were 15 different touch points for this product that eventually led to that consumer to make a purchase. So that's
Mhm.
all doable, and can be done. I think where it gets interesting is when you start to add these physical touch points, like if so now if we add in-store media, that now that consumer, they've been served 15 different ads across streaming TV and the web and a retailer's website, but now they went to the store. So now, can you link that consumer and what they saw online to them suddenly, being shown an ad for that product on a screen uh, inside the store as they walk by? And can you measure
Mhm.
the fact that they even saw it or noticed that it was there? Or if it's not digital and you just have printed advertisements on there near the product, and can you track the fact that, then that consumer actually go towards the product and they pick it up? If it was an apparel store, they go try it on. How do they interact with it? That gets a lot harder, right, to tie those things together. So that makes the attribution a little bit more difficult. And now let's say that consumer does buy it in the store. Well, which touch point was the one that convinced it? Was it the fact that they finally saw it in the store and
Yeah.
they liked it, or was it the fact that they've seen it 57 different times
Yeah.
before they ever got to the store? So it's a little tricky then, right, to figure out, well, how do you attribute that one? And there's um, we can kind of poke fun at this a little bit and say, well, yeah, if you have 50 different touch points like that, there's probably 7 different technologies that were involved, and which one gets credit for having
Okay.
convinced and
That's a
converted
big
this
thing.
customer, right? So
Yeah,
it is.
again, we face a lot of times the same issue. Like Facebook takes, hey, it's because of us. Google credits it, it's because of us.
Right.
AdRoll does that. So yeah, it's
Yep.
very difficult.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what is the risk you see with if retailers do it badly? It might impact the customer relationship
Mhm.
and many other negative factors. So, what retailer should be very careful when implementing these kind of things?
Yeah, I think maybe the number one argument that's always presented for this is if you use Amazon as an example. So we mentioned before, right? Over the years, when you do a product search on Amazon, you're getting served more and more ads on that results page than ever before. It used to be where maybe there were 1 or 2 sponsored ad placements at the top.
Mhm.
Now there are maybe 6, 7, 8 sponsored ads at the top, and if you scroll down, even along down further down the page, there are more that show
Mhm.
up. So some people have argued, when half the page is all sponsored ads, how does that actually help the advertiser
Mhm.
um, to justify the spend? And B, what does that do to the customer experience? And you would think customers at some point revolt and say, I'm tired of seeing all these ads. I don't even want to bother anymore. I think inherently it's a good argument because people, if you ask consumers will tell you they hate advertising, right?
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, I think if you ask a consumer, how do you feel about seeing advertisement on TV, or how do you feel about seeing advertising in your streaming TV service or ads on the web page? And every consumer will say, oh, I'm so sick and tired of seeing so many ads. It's too much. I never click on them. I hate these ads. Well, that's what they say. But the fact is, right, advertisers wouldn't keep paying for these ads if they didn't work. so
Okay.
so the end result is that's not what happens, right? So, and if you
They
take
see
the Amazon
value.
example, right, Amazon measures everything, right? There isn't
Mhm.
anything that happens on Amazon's website that they don't have umpteen different metrics for it and measurements for it. So if there were, quote, too many ads on a page,
Mhm.
Amazon would have measured that fact and would have data that says consumers are walking away and not buying. They're not converting. But the fact that they keep adding more tells us
Mhm.
one of two things. It says that A, we haven't hit that limit yet where people walk away and say it's too much, I can't stand it.
Mhm.
And two, it also tells us that they're probably still experimenting to find out where that limit is, which
Mhm.
is why we see more and more. So I think every retailer can kind of put themselves through the same kind of exercise to say there is a limit, right? Your customer eventually is going to get tired of seeing so many ads. But how you determine that is very experimental, because you can't just rely on surveying consumers and saying, oh well, how many ads, if you ask someone how many ads are you willing to tolerate on a search results page, I would argue most consumers will say I don't want to see any ads. But the
Understood.
reality is that of course consumers are tolerating it, and the fact is we're clicking on it because it works. The advertisers are seeing trackable conversions that tell them the ad placement worked and people bought the product, which is why they keep spending the money on it, and why the growth rate is so high, why it's a double-digit annual growth rate, and why we see the overall
Mhm.
spend in retail media going up year over year,
Yeah.
despite any challenges to it. So um, I think the argument around customer experience, it's a valid thought argument to make, but I think in
Mhm.
practical terms, we haven't hit that point where it's actually a negative yet.
Annoying. I understand. So one last question I would love to have on this is, uh, if somebody wants to start now, like what should be his next step, to let's think about retail media. What should be his next step?
Mhm. Yeah, so I
Anything?
think that depends a lot on where you are in the phase. So if you're a retailer
Mhm.
who has not jumped into retail media
Yes.
yet, and you
Mhm.
believe you have a valid business case to justify building it out because you have an online marketplace, or
Mhm.
you have a good strong audience that you think you can monetize that data with advertisers, then really the first step is identify what's the tech stack you're going to use for it. Because the number one thing that the brands want now, because this has uh, matured enough in recent years, is the reporting and the measurement. So most retailers think that as long as I tell a brand, hey, I can give you a great ability to target and define an audience segment. Well, the fact is every retail media network can do that. That's kind of the baseline. So that's not enough, right? Yes, of course you have to give that ability to the brand advertiser, but you also then have to back that up with measurement after the fact that shows them exactly what was presented where. How are you tracking these consumers? They have to have the reporting to justify, yes, it worked, or no, it didn't, so they can alter the dollars that they're spending on that with you. And then the second thing is to recognize that you are competing with all these other retail media networks. Your audience isn't unique to you only, right?
Mhm.
Most, that consumer that, yes, they shop with you, but they're also shopping for groceries at a grocery store, which means, depending on the product, it may be of interest, right, to that
Mhm.
advertiser, that I also want to go to that retail media network. And most large brands are willing to work with up to 6 or 7 retail media networks, but there
Mhm.
are dozens and dozens of retail media networks out there, so they're being picky and choosing which ones to work with. So if you're
Work
new
with.
and you're starting, those to me are the things you have to look at. It's how do you package the offering, how do you make that
Mhm.
distinct enough. It's your starting point is, okay, it's online on your marketplace website, but can you do in store, can you
Okay.
partner with a streaming provider and integrate that? And then the second piece is, how are you doing the reporting? Because brands want good
Reporting.
reporting to understand the results, and without that they're not going to work with you.
Okay. And your final thought about the future of retail media and with AI. What's your final thought?
Yeah, yeah. So so I'm not yet in this camp that says that the AI and the agentic AI is going to be an existential crisis for retail media. I
Right.
think they're going to coexist for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a risk? Yes. I mean, I do think that this double digit growth can't last forever in retail media.
Yes.
So I think we are going to see a plateau and it's going to start to level off probably in the next few years. I don't think it's a concern for people to worry about. Do I have to steal market share in RMNs from Amazon and Walmart? I think if that's what you're worrying about, you're worrying about the wrong thing. If you start to worry about the AI piece eating away at your retail media margin, I think it's worth keeping an eye on it and tracking it. But the fact is, even all of this data around consumers using AI for shopping and converting that way, we're still talking about maybe 5% of all the traffic that's happening on these AI LLMs. It's very small, fractional amount of traffic that's being sent to a retailer to buy. And we don't really yet know what's the adoption going to be. Google has announced a lot of really interesting, fascinating capabilities that can be adopted, but a lot of the counterpoints are, this is probably what Google's sixth attempt at trying to get into commerce
Yeah.
and be a commerce platform like this. Well, is this the one? Maybe it is. Maybe this one will be easy enough. But every time historically there's been a new sales channel in commerce for a consumer to buy from a retailer, every time there's a new channel, there's always talk about that new channel is going to take over everything because it's so good. Everybody's going to buy that way. And it has never happened. Never. Every channel has taken a piece of the total, but it's
Yeah.
always coexisted with the previous channel. So I think that's still going to happen. And it's a matter of, you can't ignore it. You don't want to ignore it because then you are going to lose. You need to define for yourself, how are you going to participate and be present in that channel so that consumers find you. So it's just you need to treat it like an additional channel and accept that it's one more channel your business has to operate in.
I understand. All right. Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks for your time. I hope our insights are useful for our viewers. And I will connect with you for another round of discussion in another 6 months.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's been fun.
Have a great day.